The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floors. It was just another busy Monday, with travelers rushing to catch their flights, dragging wheelie bags behind them and clutching their coffee cups like lifelines. At the Delta Airlines check-in counter, a well-dressed woman in her 40s stood tapping her designer boots impatiently. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the counter as she watched the airline staff type away at their computer. The woman's expensive leather handbag and matching luggage set marked her as someone used to first-class treatment. "I don't understand," she said, her voice getting louder with each word. "I've been a Platinum member for 5 years now. How can you possibly tell me my first-class seat isn't available?" She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her emails. "I booked this flight 3 months ago." Behind her, a young soldier in his crisp military uniform waited quietly. His combat boots were perfectly polished, his uniform immaculate, showing the deep pride he took in his service. He held a standard economy ticket in his hands, occasionally checking the time on his watch, a simple, worn timepiece that had seen him through 2 tours of duty. The airline staff member, a kind-faced woman with graying hair at her temples, tried to explain the situation. "Ma'am, I completely understand your frustration. Unfortunately, due to an aircraft change, several seats had to be reassigned. We're doing our best to accommodate everyone." "Accommodate?" The woman's voice rose higher. "I paid extra for that seat. I have an important business meeting in Chicago, and I need to be fresh when I arrive. I can't be crammed in economy-like." She glanced back at the other passengers waiting in line, her nose wrinkling slightly. "Well, you know." The soldier shifted his weight from one foot to another, but maintained his professional composure. A few other travelers nearby began to take notice of the scene, some shaking their heads in disapproval at the woman's behavior. The check-in agent's fingers flew across her keyboard, trying to find a solution. "We're truly sorry for the inconvenience. We can offer you priority boarding in economy and a partial refund for the difference in ticket price. We're also happy to provide you with a voucher for future travel." "A voucher?" The woman practically spat the word. "Do you know how many miles I've accumulated? This is absolutely unacceptable." She pulled out her phone again, this time opening her social media app. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows about this treatment." What she didn't notice was the older gentleman in a well-cut suit standing near the customer service desk. His weathered face and straight posture hinted at a military background, though he now wore a small pin on his lapel, marking him as a board member of the airline. He watched the scene unfold with growing interest, particularly noting how the young soldier maintained his dignity despite the woman's increasingly loud complaints. The check-in agent glanced at her computer screen one more time, then looked at the soldier's economy ticket. A small smile crossed her face as she made a decision that would set in motion events none of them could have predicted. The morning sun continued to stream through those airport windows, about to illuminate a situation that would soon capture the attention of millions across the country. Through it all, security cameras silently recorded every moment, their red lights blinking steadily. In an age where every public interaction had the potential to go viral, this ordinary Monday morning at Atlanta International Airport was about to become anything but ordinary. The air felt charged with tension, like the moments before a summer storm. Other passengers had begun to slow their hurried pace, some pretending to check their phones while actually watching the drama unfold. A few had already pulled out their devices, sensing that something noteworthy was about to happen. The check-in agent's fingers paused over her keyboard as she made a decision. Looking up at the soldier with a warm smile, she spoke in a clear, professional voice. "Sir, we'd like to thank you for your service. We have a first-class seat available, and we'd be honored if you'd accept an upgrade today." The soldier's eyes widened in surprise. "Ma'am, that's very kind, but you don't have to." "We want to," the agent insisted, already printing his new boarding pass. "It's the least we can do." The well-dressed woman's head snapped around so fast her designer sunglasses nearly flew off her head. "Excuse me." She stepped closer to the counter, her voice rising. "You just told me there weren't any first-class seats available." "A seat became available during our conversation," the agent explained calmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she handed the soldier his new boarding pass. "As part of our policy, we offer complimentary upgrades to active service members when possible." The woman's face flushed red. So you're giving him my seat? Do you have any idea who I am? She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm going to call your corporate office right now. This is completely unacceptable. Other passengers in line began to whisper among themselves. A young mother explained quietly to her curious daughter why the soldier's uniform was so important. An elderly gentleman with a veteran's cap nodded approvingly at the agent's decision. The soldier stood quietly, holding his new boarding pass. His face remained composed, though anyone watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. He'd faced much worse in his tours of duty, but there was something particularly painful about facing such treatment on home soil. "Ma'am," he said softly, "if it's causing this much trouble, I'm happy to stay in my original seat." "Oh, no, you don't," the woman snapped. "Don't try to act all noble now. You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you? Standing there in your uniform, hoping someone would notice. Well, I've worked too hard for my status to have it handed out to just anyone. Whoa. Is there a problem here?" The new voice cut through the tension like a knife. The older gentleman who had been watching from the customer service desk approached, his footsteps measured and deliberate. His suit was expensive but understated, and that small airline board member pin glinted on his lapel. The woman's expression shifted instantly, recognizing an authority figure who might sympathize with her position. "Yes, there absolutely is. I'm a platinum member, and they're giving away my first-class seat to," she gestured dismissively at the soldier. To a staff sergeant in the United States military, the gentleman finished for her, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of command. A man who's chosen to serve his country, who's probably spent months away from his family, facing dangers you and I can only imagine. The woman's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. More phones had appeared among the crowd of onlookers, recording the scene. The morning sunlight caught the soldiers' service medals, making them shine. "But my status?" The woman tried again, her voice weaker now. "Status," the gentleman repeated thoughtfully. "Let's talk about status. This young man has earned his status by defending the very freedoms that allow you to travel freely across this country. He's earned it through sacrifice, courage, and dedication to something larger than himself." The check-in agent stood straight up behind her counter, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The crowd had grown larger, with more people stopping to watch. Even a few airport staff members had paused in their duties, pretending to check flight information while actually listening intently. The gentleman turned to the soldier. "Please accept the upgrade. Consider it a small token of our appreciation." Then, addressing the woman again, "As for your platinum status, I believe we should have a discussion about what that really means in terms of responsibility and representation of our airline's values." The woman's face had lost its angry flush, replaced by a growing paleness as she realized just how badly she had misread the situation. Her designer handbag suddenly felt very heavy on her arm, her expensive boots no longer quite so comfortable. The morning sun continued to stream through those huge airport windows, but now it seemed to shine differently on each person in the scene: the proud soldier, the humbled passenger, the satisfied airline staff, and the watching crowd. In the background, the airport speakers crackled to life, announcing more departures and arrivals, a reminder that life would go on, but perhaps with a few people changed by what they had witnessed. The gentleman in the well-cut suit had seen a lot during his 40 years of military service, but something about this scene struck a particularly deep chord. As he stood watching the situation unfold, his mind drifted back to his own early days in uniform, when similar incidents weren't just common, they were expected. He adjusted his board member pin, a small gesture that had become habit over the past 5 years since joining Delta's leadership team. Around him, the airport continued its constant motion, but this little pocket of space near the check-in counter had become its own world, filled with tension and unspoken words. From his position, he could see everything clearly. The way the soldier's shoulders remained squared despite the woman's words. The subtle shifts in the crowd as more people gathered, their faces showing a mix of disgust and fascination. The quick, nervous glances of airline staff, unsure whether to intervene. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve nearby. "Mom, why is that lady being mean to the soldier?" The mother quickly shushed him, but the question hung in the air, its innocent clarity cutting through the tension. The gentleman noticed something else too: the phones. At least a dozen passengers had their devices out, recording everything. In his day, incidents like this would have been witnessed by a few, forgotten by most. But now? This would be online within minutes, shared thousands of times before the plane even took off. He watched as the woman's body language shifted from aggressive to defensive. Her designer handbag, probably worth more than 3 months of a soldier's base pay, now served as a shield she held close to her chest. Her perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the beads of sweat forming at her temples. The soldier, meanwhile, maintained his composure. His combat boots were planted firmly on the airport's polished floor, the same way they'd probably been planted in far less hospitable terrain overseas. His eyes occasionally met those of other veterans in a crowd, quick glances of shared understanding. The gentleman felt the weight of his own experiences pressing down on him. He'd risen through the ranks, from a young recruit to a retired general, and along the way, he'd promised himself he'd never stay silent in moments like this. He'd seen too many good soldiers endure similar treatment with quiet dignity, their service to their country somehow not enough to earn them basic respect. A flight attendant walked past, slowing down to observe the scene. The gentleman caught her eye, and a silent message passed between them. She nodded slightly and stepped away, phone in hand, presumably to alert higher management about the situation. The crowd had grown larger now. A group of business travelers had paused their hurried walk to their gates. An off-duty pilot stood watching, his uniform crisp and his expression grim. Even the barista from the nearby coffee shop had stepped out from behind her counter to see what was happening. Through the huge airport windows, planes could be seen taking off and landing, their engines creating a distant roar that seemed to underscore the tension of the moment. The morning sun had risen higher now, its rays highlighting the service medals on the soldier's uniform, making them shine like beacons. The woman's platinum membership card was still clutched in her hand, but it seemed to have lost its importance. Every time she tried to speak, the words seemed to die in her throat as she noticed more phones recording, more eyes watching, more heads shaking in disapproval. The gentleman took a deep breath, straightening his tie. He'd seen enough. This wasn't just about one first-class seat or one flight. This was about something much bigger, about respect, about dignity, about the kind of country they were all working to build. As a board member, he had the power to do more than just watch. As a veteran, he had the duty to act. He could feel the weight of his decision as he stepped forward. The fluorescent lights overhead caught his board member pin, making it gleam. In his peripheral vision, he saw the check-in agent straighten her posture, recognizing what was about to happen. The morning had started as just another day at Atlanta International Airport, but it was about to become something much more significant. The woman's voice grew louder as she pointed at the soldier's new boarding pass. He should know his place. I've earned my spot in first class. I pay full price for my tickets while he probably got some military discount. Her words echoed through the terminal, causing several people to stop in their tracks. The soldier remained silent, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to her outburst. His hands were clasped behind his back in a relaxed parade rest position, a habit formed through years of service. Though his expression remained neutral, anyone who looked closely could see the slight tension in his jaw. A group of teenagers nearby had their phones raised, live streaming the scene. An elderly couple shook their heads in dismay, the old man clutching his own veteran's cap tightly. A flight attendant who had been walking past now stood frozen, her rolling suitcase forgotten at her side. I demand to speak to someone in charge. The woman continued, her designer heels clicking against the floor as she stepped closer to the check-in counter. This is reverse discrimination, and I won't stand for it. The check-in agent's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, but her voice remained steady. Ma'am, please lower your voice. We're trying to. Don't tell me to lower my voice. Do you know how many miles I've flown with this airline? I could buy and sell. Excuse me, a child's voice suddenly piped up from the crowd. My daddy was a soldier too. He said they protect us so we can be free. The woman spun around, momentarily startled by the innocent intervention. The child's mother quickly pulled him close, but his words had already hit their mark. The woman's face flushed deeper, a mix of embarrassment and anger coloring her cheeks. You don't understand, she sputtered, looking around for support but finding none. This isn't about his service. This is about principle. I paid for first class. An airport custodian paused his work nearby, leaning on his mop as he watched the scene unfold. He caught the soldier's eye and gave a subtle nod of support, a gesture that spoke volumes about the silent solidarity forming among the onlookers. The soldier finally spoke, his voice measured and respectful. "Ma'am, if this seat is causing such distress, unhappy to—" "Oh, don't you dare try to act noble now," she cut him off. "You're loving this, aren't you? Making me look like the bad guy? Well, I know my rights." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The morning sunlight streaming through the terminal windows seemed to spotlight the scene like a stage play, with every person in the crowd holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. A young businesswoman in the crowd spoke up, her voice clear and firm. "The only person making you look bad is yourself, ma'am." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. More phones appeared, recording the confrontation. The woman's grip on her designer handbag tightened until her knuckles turned white. "This is ridiculous," she declared, fumbling with her phone. "I'm calling corporate right now. I'll have all of your jobs for this. And you," she turned to the soldier, "you can't just stand there in your uniform expecting special treatment." The soldier's response was quiet, but carried across the now hushed terminal. "With all due respect, ma'am, this uniform isn't about expecting special treatment. It's about being willing to give up everything to protect the rights of all Americans, including yours." A soft chorus of "ooh" rippled through the crowd. Someone started to clap, then another person joined in, but the gentle applause was cut short as the gentleman in the suit finally stepped forward, his board member pin catching the light. The morning light continued to stream through those huge airport windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on truth. In that moment, everyone present knew they were witnessing something that went far beyond a simple dispute over airplane seating. This was about something much deeper, something that touched the very heart of what it meant to be American. The gentleman stepped forward with the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding attention. His perfectly pressed suit and military bearing drew all eyes to him as he cleared his throat. "I believe I can help resolve this situation," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of service. The woman's expression brightened, clearly hoping she'd found an ally. Finally, someone who understands how platinum members should be treated. She straightened her designer blazer, shooting a triumphant look at the others. "Ma'am," the gentleman began, touching the board member pin on his lapel, "I'm actually a member of Delta Airlines board of directors, and I've been watching this situation unfold with great interest." The color drained from the woman's face as she realized the significance of his words. Her phone, which she'd been holding up threateningly, slowly lowered to her side. "But more importantly," he continued, "I'm a retired general who served this country for 40 years. He turned to the soldier and offered a crisp salute, which was immediately returned with perfect precision, and I've seen far too many incidents like this during my career." The crowd had grown completely silent. Even the usual airport announcements seemed muted, as if the terminal itself was holding its breath. The morning sun cast long shadows across the floor, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere. "You see," the gentleman continued, addressing the woman directly but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, "this isn't just about a seat on an airplane. This is about respect, dignity, and the values we claim to hold dear as Americans." A baby cooed somewhere in the crowd, the sound emphasizing the pure innocence of the moment. The woman clutched her designer handbag closer, as if trying to shield herself from the truth of his words. "This young man," he gestured to the soldier, "represents the very best of our country. He stands ready to lay down his life to protect our freedoms, including your right to stand here and complain about airline seating arrangements." Several people in the crowd nodded in agreement. An older woman wiped a tear from her eye. The check-in agent stood straight up behind her counter, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Your platinum status," the gentleman continued, "is a privilege based on money spent. His status," he nodded toward the soldier, "was earned through sacrifice, courage, and dedication to something greater than himself." The woman's lips trembled as she tried to form a response. I didn't mean to." "I believe you did mean to," the gentleman cut in firmly but not unkindly. "And that's precisely why this moment is so important. It's an opportunity for growth, for understanding, for seeing beyond our own privileges to recognize the true measure of a person's worth. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Now, about your platinum membership status. He let the words hang in the air meaningfully. The woman's eyes widened as the full impact of her actions began to sink in. Around her, dozens of phones were still recording, their little red lights blinking like tiny judgmental eyes. The soldier remained at parade rest, his dignity intact, his presence a silent reminder of everything the gentleman was saying. A young girl in the crowd tapped on her father's sleeve and whispered something that made him smile proudly. Sometimes the gentleman addressed the crowd now, his voice carrying the wisdom of experience. We need these moments to remind us who we really are as a nation. It's easy to talk about respect and equality. It's harder to live those values when they inconvenience us personally. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, its rays now streaming directly through the terminal windows, illuminating the scene in golden light. In that moment, everyone present felt the weight of history, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the power of one person's words to change hearts and minds. The impact of the gentleman's words hung in the air like summer thunder. The woman's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she looked down at the business card he'd handed her. The Delta Airlines logo seemed to stare back accusingly. Your platinum membership is suspended, effective immediately, the gentleman stated firmly. We'll be conducting a full review of this incident. His voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the unmistakable weight of consequence. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "It's already on Twitter." Another voice added, "My video has hundreds of shares already." The modern world's swift justice was already in motion, captured forever in countless digital recordings. The woman's designer shoes suddenly seemed to wobble beneath her. "My company," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "When they see this." "Actions have consequences," the gentleman replied quietly. "But so does growth. How you handle this moment moving forward will say more about your character than the mistake you made today." The check-in agent, who had watched everything unfold, quickly printed new boarding documents. "Sir," she addressed the soldier, "your first-class seat is confirmed. We've also made sure you have priority boarding for your connecting flight." The soldier nodded graciously. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your kindness." His simple dignity in that moment spoke volumes more than any angry outburst could have. A young businessman in the crowd stepped forward. "Sir," he addressed the soldier, "I'm on that flight too. Would you allow me to buy you a drink on board? It would be an honor." Others quickly joined in. "Let me get your coffee. Can I carry your bag?" The outpouring of support was spontaneous and genuine, a collective attempt to right the wrong they had witnessed. The woman stared at her reflection in the terminal's window, her carefully curated image now crumbling before her eyes. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications. The incident was spreading across social media like wildfire. I need to make this right," she stammered, turning toward the soldier. But before she could continue, the gentleman raised his hand. "Not now," he said firmly. "Any apology at this point would seem forced. Take some time. Reflect. Understand why what happened here was so wrong. Real change comes from genuine understanding, not from fear of consequences." The boarding call for their flight echoed through the terminal. As if on cue, a group of elementary school students on a field trip walked past, their young faces a reminder of why these moments mattered. They were learning from everything they saw. The woman gathered her expensive luggage, her movements mechanical. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of her own face in a nearby shop window. For perhaps the first time that day, she really saw herself, and the reflection seemed to make her flinch. "Before you go," the gentleman called after her, "remember this. That uniform represents someone willing to die to protect your right to make better choices than you made today." The soldier shouldered his simple duffel bag, preparing to board. A teenage girl approached him shyly. "My brother's in the army too," she said. "Can I take a picture with you? He'd be so proud." The morning sun had shifted now, its rays catching the soldier's service medals once again. But this time, everyone in the terminal could see their true value, not just as pieces of metal pinned to a uniform, but as symbols of the very best of human nature. The crowd began to disperse, but something had changed in that space. People walked a little taller, smiled a little more readily at strangers. An elderly veteran wiped tears from his eyes, remembering his own days in uniform and battles fought on different fronts. As the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, the gentleman watched the scene with satisfaction. Sometimes, he thought, the most important victories weren't won on battlefields, but in everyday moments like these, when people stood up for what was right. The story of what happened that morning at Atlanta International Airport didn't end with the final boarding call. Within hours, videos of the incident had spread across every social media platform, touching hearts and sparking conversations across the country. The airline's corporate office found their phones ringing nonstop, but instead of complaints, they were receiving an outpouring of support for their handling of the situation. "That's how you stand up for what's right," one caller said. "Your board member showed us what real leadership looks like." 3 days later, in a quiet office overlooking the city, the woman sat across from her company's HR director. The viral videos had reached her employers, and the meeting was both necessary and difficult. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something different about her demeanor, a humility that hadn't been there before. "I've learned more in the past 3 days than in the past 3 decades," she admitted, her designer handbag sitting forgotten at her feet. "I keep watching those videos, seeing myself as others saw me. It's been eye-opening." Meanwhile, the soldier's story had touched a nerve across the nation. Veterans groups shared the video, celebrating not just the outcome, but the dignity with which he handled the situation. Young recruits in training watched it as an example of maintaining composure under pressure. A week after the incident, Delta Airlines announced new company-wide changes. "This moment has taught us that we can do more," their press release stated. They unveiled enhanced sensitivity training programs for all staff and strengthened their anti-discrimination policies. The gentleman from the board personally oversaw these initiatives. The woman's public apology came 2 weeks later. She chose to deliver it not through a polished PR statement, but through a raw, honest video posted on her personal social media. "I'm not here to save my reputation," she began. "I'm here because I need to own my mistakes and show others that change is possible." She went on to describe how the incident had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. "That first-class seat became a mirror," she said, her voice catching, "and I didn't like what I saw in my reflection." Local schools began using the video in their citizenship classes, not just to discuss discrimination, but to show how moments of conflict could become opportunities for growth. One teacher reported that her students had started a random acts of respect challenge inspired by the story. The soldier, true to his character, declined dozens of media interview requests. Instead, he used his unexpected platform to advocate for veteran support programs and unity in diversity. "This was never about one seat on one flight," he wrote in a brief statement. "It was about remembering that we're all flying together on this journey called life." 1 month after the incident, a photo went viral. The woman volunteering at a veterans center, serving meals with tears in her eyes. No cameras had been invited. Someone had simply captured the moment. She had found her way to give back, to learn, to grow. The gentleman from the board received thousands of letters. One in particular touched him deeply, from a young boy who wrote, "My dad says you helped everyone learn an important lesson that day. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you and the soldier." The morning sun still streams through the windows at Atlanta International Airport, just like it did that day. But now, posted discreetly near the check-in counters, there's a small plaque that reads, "Every journey begins with respect. Every destination is reached together." The incident became more than just another viral moment in a world full of fleeting social media sensations. It became a reminder that even in our most difficult moments, we have the power to choose how we treat each other. It showed that sometimes the most important journeys aren't measured in miles, but in the steps we take toward becoming better people. As for that first-class seat, it became something of a legend among Delta flight crews. "Remember the seat that changed hearts," they would say. Because sometimes the smallest things can create the biggest changes, and the truest measure of class has nothing to do with where you sit on an airplane.